This is Vanessa Marshall, Harrison Dula from Star Wars Rebels, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi.
Joining us today for a cup of coffee to talk about the next book in the incredible High Republic series. The book is called Temptation of the Force. It is written by Tessa Gratton, and Tessa is joining us on Coffee with Kenobi. Tessa, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here.
I am very excited to chat with you. We were just talking briefly before we started recording, and the book is wonderful. I cannot wait to see the reaction to it. So let's just kick off the conversation. This will be a spoiler-free conversation, so most likely you won't have gotten a chance to read the entire book yet because it comes out on June 11th. So this will just be a way to whet your appetite for what is coming. So would you have believed that the High Republic Publishing Initiative would have flourished so robustly so soon? Talk about what this era of Star Wars means to you.
This has been such an incredible experience for me as both a writer and as a lifelong Star Wars fan. You know, one of my earliest memories when I was about 3 years old was seeing Return of the Jedi in the movie theater. And it's been really nonstop. My whole family are, huge fans. And we've always had like parties for the new movies and that kind of thing. So just being involved as a creator, I never really thought it was possible that it was the kind of thing that would happen to me. And because of that, I never even really sought it out as a professional until, my very good friend, Justine Ireland, who we've worked on other projects and have been friends and read for each other since about 2015, she dragged me into this. Not quite kicking and screaming, but I was really nervous about joining such a huge thing and such a new project for Star Wars, something that had never really been done before, where it was all starting with books, as opposed to coming from like a media. And so, it took me a really long time to get over that in a certain way, like to just like stop being just awed and surprised and like, okay, I just have to ignore this and just do my job, to a point where I could actually like sit back and kind of appreciate the actual, the scope of the High Republic itself. And that, started happening for me in like the months right before Path of Deceit came out, which was my first book for the High Republic with Justina. And, things were really ramping up, and the package, the cover was just so incredible. And the early response to it was, people were really excited. And I had a chance to just be like, okay, you need to emotionally prepare yourself for this because now you have to, actually talk to readers who are going to be responding to the first, Jedi. I got to create a Jedi basically. And, that, I put everything that I wanted from like a really excited, wonderful, I want to be a Jedi into Kevmo. And yeah, I was just really blown away by not only the response to the book, but the enthusiasm and kindness that the readers and the fandom immediately showed. You expect to like the books. You go in hoping at least that this is going to be an amazing book. And that is so unique as a professional writer. I've had like 13 or 14 books before my first High Republic book, and that's not how most readers go in to reading a book in my experience. So as a professional, and as a fan, it's just been unbelievably incredible. And on top of that, I get to like make stuff up and tell stories about Jedi, which are my favorite part of Star Wars. The space wizards, the magic, that was, what I really was drawn to as a teenager in particular when I was reading the Legends books in the 90s. And I read all of them. And I just wanted more Jedi lore, more stuff with a Jedi. And now I get to like do that for not only fun, but for a living. It's really incredible.
What a wonderful origin story that is. So cool. No, I think what you're sharing with us is just, I think that enthusiasm and that passion, that knowledge of Star Wars very much comes through in all of your work. And so then you get this, you've written for the High Republic, you've written several books before this, but then we find out about Temptation of the Force. I think it's fair to say this is a book we have been anticipating since pretty early on in Light of the Jedi, and it kicked things off. What does it mean for you personally and professionally to be the one to tell this story?
It, it's really hard to put into words, even though I've been trying. um, when I was first presented with being able to write this book, which I was also anticipating ever since like the last few pages of Light of the Jedi, I was like, ooh, this is a promise. We're being promised something with these two Jedi in particular. Temptation was presented to me as, we need you to tell a Jedi love story, and it needs to be intense and fit into the overarching stories the way that Empire Strikes Back fits into things. And I was like, oh no, that is too much pressure. Not only Empire Strikes Back, but a Jedi love story. And, we're not supposed to use those words together in the same sentence, Jedi love story. It's super forbidden, like goes all the way back to one of the only things we've known about the Jedi in every era is that, they're not supposed to have attachments. And that's what we think about when we think about love and love stories of all kinds, is attachments. And obviously went very badly for Anakin.
I've heard.
Yeah, I've heard. I was really trying to figure out how I wanted to frame the way I was thinking about the narrative and the relationship specifically between Avar and Elzar, though I will say I tried to bring all kinds of different love into the book. So it's not just about, love as Avar and Elzar think about it. But that's obviously what the main like emotional arc is. And I was thinking about Anakin. I was thinking about what we've seen before with Jedi, and how, part of the point of the High Republic is to show the Jedi in their best days, like as an organization, not including everything that's been going badly with the Nile, but like the Jedi as a power structure, as a political group, they are in their glory days at the start of the High Republic initiative. And so I wanted to play around with mirroring how when you get to the prequel trilogy and Anakin, the Jedi are not just on the decline, but like arguably already like irrevocably broken. And so how might Jedi find love and experience love as Jedi in a time when maybe they have support? Maybe the Order wouldn't just be like, no, love is bad. Love and attachment are bad. So that was it. I wanted to be like, okay, maybe when the Jedi were great, they also had room for love.
Wow. Boy, oh boy. Since we're not spoiling, there's so many things I'd love to say, but I won't do that. This is Coffee with Kenobi, spoiler free. So let's talk about, selfishly, as a writer and a teacher of writing myself, I like talking to authors about their writing process. What was your process like for this book and your schedule?
Oh, the schedule was way too fast. But that's, how it works with a big initiative like this, where everyone is like sharing deadlines and you can't fall behind, because then that pushes everyone else behind. I really prefer working on one book at a time so I can really sink into it. And I fought hard to have like 3-month chunk of my year that was last summer to just work on Temptation. And after like the initial parts of the process that are, not necessarily mine, but required for a book like this, where, I have to write a detailed outline that has to be approved at multiple levels and then, incorporate feedback and all that stuff, which is not how I normally work as a writer with detailed outlines. I wrote every day that I could, and I'm a big walker. That's how I get my exercise. It's a part of feeling happy with my life is going for long walks. But for this one in particular, I always made sure that I had my phone with me, which I don't always do, so that I basically like could talk to myself as I was on these long walks, because there's so much philosophy, almost like personal philosophy for all the different characters. And every character that has a point of view, it's important to me as a writer that that point of view is earned by giving that character not only a reason to be there for the story, but I want to put them through some tiny little change, at least. For some of them, it's a big character arc. But even when I was thinking about how am I going to frame what needs to get done with Marky and Ro, is there a way can I give him like a mini character arc? That kind of thing. So I really talked to myself a lot with this book, and also talked to a couple of the other Luminous writers who were heavily involved in these characters. I talked to Charles about Markian, and George and I talked a lot about what he was setting up in Eye of Darkness in particular, and then how I was going to pull things through. And obviously Justina and I talk about Vernestra all the time. And yeah, it was really a much more, I almost want to say I spent as many hours just thinking about how to write this book and how to pull the characters together and exactly how to nuance their dialogue as I spent actually writing it.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Well, it's so tightly constructed, and you're juggling a lot. What continually amazes me with the High Republic Initiative and all the Luminous authors is that there are so many different plot lines that are interwoven, not only through different books, but just through the individual chapters themselves. But nothing ever feels shortchanged. It's such a marvelous way to communicate. You mentioned the classic books from the Legends line, and it reminds me of that. But I would dare say, even more detailed, and maybe part of that is just the process, the organic process, the detailed outlines themselves, and that's part of the fun for me about this book, without spoiling anything, is that many characters, not just Avar and Elzar, are fascinating, but they are all interesting in their own rights. I always tell my students, and I'm babbling, so I apologize. I'm excited to talk to you. A good story, don't review the hype. Look at the story. Like, does every character change or grow in some way, shape, or form? That happens. But we have to talk about Elzar Mann, a Jedi that has grown on me immensely over the past few years. But what makes him tick? How do you get into his head when crafting this character?
I did my homework. I reread, in particular, all of the adult books from Phase 1 a couple of times with my highlighter and my sticky notes and like my notebook to take actual notes, so that I remembered, a few of the beats and like throwaway lines, like, oh, that could be pointing to something. Here are all these different threads that I can pull forward as I was really getting to know, all of the characters, but especially Elzar, because he is such a mess. And because,
True.
I knew that in Eye of Darkness, George was going to be dealing with Avar's biggest needs for what she needed to change to come back to Elzar in a lot of ways. And so, but Elzar was going to be, stuck with me in Temptation. And so I really did focus on him a lot. And I think I thought about what I liked and didn't like about him and what he does well and what he doesn't do well. And I really liked what I can't remember which book it was in, but at some point he thinks, or someone says to him, something about he does his best work when he's pushing boundaries, but he doesn't always know how to recognize right where the boundary is. He's like, I see a horizon, I'm heading for it, but he doesn't actually know very well. Like, instead of it being a, 1 foot line, for Elzar, it's like a mile line. And so there's a whole bunch of room in there for him to, try his best, but not even get very far, or not try his best. And, like all these different kinds of things. And, that all comes back to the ocean for him, where in, an ocean, the boundaries are not fixed. They are constantly in motion for all kinds of different reasons. And so, the view of the force that he has was always there. And once I was like, oh, just always, whenever you're like, I don't know exactly how to work the scene, think about Elzar, not just, having the force as an ocean, but actually being an ocean, with all of the different, things that come with that. And so I don't really know if that answers your question.
It really does. It really
okay,
does.
good.
Because it's hard to talk about without spoiling anything, right?
Yeah. Yes. It is.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love the perspective. And I think was it Kevin's book that first did that old ocean metaphor, because this is very metaphorical, and it is, right? I think with any good Jedi, they've got their literal story, then they've got their metaphorical approach to trying to figure out what's going on internally so they can help the galaxy externally.
Yeah, definitely. Hopefully.
Yes. Well, hopefully, correct. So then let's switch it and talk about Avar. What makes Avar Kriss unique in the world of the Jedi, and what is both rewarding and challenging about writing her?
I think that, it's kind of weird to say this, but what I think is unique and also most interesting to me about Avar is that she isn't or shouldn't be unique to the Jedi.
Huh.
She is, particularly, the way she starts her journey throughout the High Republic, she is at the top of her game. She is considered to be, like, if you want an example of a great Jedi, go talk to Avar Kriss. So she is supposed to be like the poster child for the Jedi in a lot of ways. The opposite of Elzar also. And, Stellan gets a little bit of that too. But, that's part of what Elzar's frustration has always been, is that Avar and Stellan are so successful. So what I like about Avar is that she really starts out good at everything and, has to get better at things because she was good at everything when maybe things weren't that hard. The Jedi hadn't faced a great challenge in a long time before before Light of the Jedi, the hyperspace disaster and all that kind of stuff, like a huge galactic challenge. And so in a lot of ways, Avar and Stellan and Elzar came up when, I don't want to say it was easy to be a good Jedi, but maybe it wasn't actually that difficult. Certainly not as hard as Vernestra had it, or Bell and Burry coming up through all of this. And so that I like that, where Avar had to sort of like have the ground knocked out from underneath her to realize that, she had hit the top of her game, but she has to be even better than that. And the way that she initially tries was frequently wrong. The choices that she made with regards to like the Drengir and, going after Lorna and all that kind of stuff, where she was like, no, this is the choice I'm making as a Jedi and as a leader, really led to her, abandoning maybe things that she shouldn't have abandoned.
Mhm.
So yeah, I like that about her a lot.
When you mentioned that, it kind of put into my mind what I was reading, or I was thinking when I was reading this one, especially, I kept thinking, well, shouldn't everybody try to be like Avar Chris? Like, isn't that the goal? Isn't that the standard? But yet, I think she approaches it with humility and grace, but just this hunger to be fearless. And I think that's so cool. She kind of reminds me
Yeah,
of Ahsoka in a weird kind of a way. There's some similarities.
I can see it.
Yeah, yeah. They're certainly
Yeah,
not identical, but I feel like they would
yeah,
get along. They'd be great to listen to have coffee together.
I think so too. That would be great.
Yeah. Well, let's
I
talk
think
about
we can arrange
Vernestra.
that.
Yeah, yeah. Let's do
Sure.
that.
Yeah.
Let's talk to Mike and see if he wants to do that. So you've written Vernestra on several occasions. I mean, I'm going to go out on a limb. It's not really much of a limb and say she's one of our favorites. I mean, she's just such a beloved Jedi. We're going to get to see her in live action in The Acolyte.
Mhm.
But for you, how has Vernestra changed over the years of writing her?
Um, you know, she has changed significantly, and she had done most of her changing before I actually personally got to write her, because I didn't really do that until Defy the Storm. And that was really Justina bringing her, the trauma that, she shares with everyone who was traumatized by Starlight, but also, everything else she's been through. And so I think that when I came to writing her a little bit in Defy the Storm, but especially in Temptation, she really knows at this point how she needs to fight in order to help the Jedi and the greater galaxy survive this. She knows what she is good at now. She knows what she can do, and she knows what she can't do, which I think is a really important distinction.
Mhm.
She's like, this is what I'm suited to. And, maybe I'll be suited to something different in 20 or 50 or 100 years, but this is, I've come through this fire, and it's okay for me to make different choices than my fellow Jedi are making. As long as we're all making them toward the light, then that's fine. I'll work with the council or be a way seeker or whatever, but we're in this together, even if we're working differently.
Right, right. You almost sound like you're in a quote High School Musical there. It comes up at the end of the year for high school every year as a teacher. No, that's so good. I can't wait to see what people think about Vernestra in this book. Let's switch gears. We got to talk about our antagonist, Marchion Ro, the Nihil. What makes a good villain for you, and how do you approach the Nihil in Temptation of the Force?
I do really like thinking about villains to start off as, and people have said this a lot before me, but like where the villain needs to at least think of themselves as the hero of their own story.
Mm-hmm.
And so what do they want, and what are they, how are they trying to achieve what they want? And, that works really well for most villains. Like it definitely works for Gira, and even
Mm-hmm.
for General Vice. And but it really kind of breaks down when you come to the Nile as a whole, because what they're supposed to want is destruction and chaos. And so you can pluck an individual Nile and tell a story about them, where of course they know what they want and they have their own reasons for being in the Nile at all. But as a force, they're just chaos. And Markian is interesting because it's been very unclear what he wants, other than maybe power, maybe to bring the galaxy to its knees, maybe to kill the Jedi, but we never, once he does something, he's kind of like, okay, well, I checked that off the list. now what? And so it's almost like there's this, just emptiness somewhere inside of him that he keeps thinking, okay, this is how I can fill that, but nothing works. Of course, I don't think he is self-aware enough to know this. This is just my interpretation
Sure.
of what's actually going on under the deep under the surface of Markian. And so because it was really hard for me to pinpoint that, well, how is Markian the hero of his own story? Because he would disdain that question. He would just be like, ugh, why would I want to be the hero of any story? That's not what I'm about. And so, but it's easy to do that with, like I said, with Gira and General Weiss. So, yeah.
Right. We're doing so good at not spoiling stuff.
I know.
So good. This is a master class in talking about it without. Oh, fantastic. Well, this one might be a little bit easier to talk about, but also more challenging. It's philosophical. This has been coming up since Phantom Menace, probably. But is the Jedi maxim of no attachments a practical ideology? And how does that help provide a powerful backdrop for this story?
I think it's bad.
Yeah.
I think that particularly when it is so important in the prequel trilogy, it really reminds me of when Leia in A New Hope says, I think to Tarkin, she says, the more you tighten your grip, the more star systems will slip through your fingers. That's how I feel about no attachments, that it is there to control the Jedi. And it just, the more you say no, the more it's like, no, you can't have feelings. No, you can't act on them. No, yes, you're supposed to be fighting for justice and helping people and whatever, but you can't care about it so much that you form an attachment, because then you'll be evil. It's drawing the direct line from attachment to the dark side is just, it was a fundamental flaw when the Jedi Council, thousands of years ago or whenever, was making their bylaws or whatever they did. No attachments. I really think is at the core of why the Jedi ultimately failed.
I agree, because you're asking them to be compassionate without having compassion.
Right. Exactly. And there's a lot of different ways to, nuance that. And that was one of the things that I wanted to explore a little bit. How could a Jedi come to disagree with that, but also agree with it? How do you get to a place where it's like, well, I understand why, no attachments exists, but also that really has nothing to do with light and the Force and love.
Listening to Coffee with Kenobi, you are, with Dan Z, the podcast you're looking for. This is...
So, and that couldn't have been done in the prequel trilogy era, just because everything was so broken already.
Right. And this helps to kind of create that foundation that causes perhaps some of those problems, which is kind of fun to sort of compare and think about. Well, Tessa, undoubtedly, besides making things better in a galaxy far, far away, you've got other projects. What is coming out in the future that you are allowed to share with us that we can look forward to?
Sure. I have a short story out in an anthology this fall called Fairies Never Lie. And it's a collection of short stories about fairies. And it was a lot of fun. A lot of different authors are in that. And Zoraida Cordova is one of the editors for that. And I think she also has a story in it. And besides that, I have the first book in a brand new epic fantasy trilogy called The Mercy Makers that comes out next early summer. There's not actually a month yet, but probably May or June of next year. The Mercy Makers comes out, and that's a big, sexy like I said, epic fantasy about like taboo and sex and power and all my favorite things to write about. So yeah, I'm excited for that.
Wonderful. Well, everyone should be really excited because Star Wars The High Republic Temptation of the Force by Tessa Gratton comes out June 11th, found wherever books are sold. If you haven't pre-ordered it yet, what are you waiting for? I highly recommend it. It's a blast. And Tessa, an absolute pleasure and delight to speak with you. You're welcome anytime on Coffee with Kenobi. Thank you so much.
Okay, I'm super happy to have been here. And maybe sometime we can chat with spoilers.
I would love that.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited. It is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names, sounds, and any other Star Wars-related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Coffee with Kenobi unless otherwise indicated.
This is the podcast you're looking for.